There is a plant growing right now, in a strip of wetland barely 60 miles wide, that solved a problem no other flowering plant on Earth has ever solved the same way. It did not grow taller to reach more light. It did not grow deeper roots to reach more water. It grew a trap. Because the ground beneath it offered almost nothing, no nitrogen worth speaking of, no phosphorus, a soil so acidic, so leached, so thoroughly starved of the minerals every other plant takes for granted, that ordinary root systems simply failed here, generation after generation, for longer than anyone can measure. This plant did not fail. It changed the terms of survival entirely. If the soil would not feed it, it would feed itself. Before we go further, this channel exists to hold the things that got left behind, not to grow an audience, not to chase attention, to keep a record before the record disappears, the way so many quiet, specific histories already have. If that matters to you, stay only long enough to help us preserve it. That is the only subscription we ask for, not numbers, custody. Before you continue watching, please check the link I provided in this video's description. That way, you can verify it yourself. Now, the archive. The ground here has a name few outside the region ever learn, the Carolina Bays. Shallow, elliptical depressions scattered across the coastal plain of North and South Carolina. Their origins still debated. Their soil among the poorest on the continent. Waterlogged for months at a time. Starved of oxygen at the root. Acidic enough to slow decomposition to a crawl. Which means nutrients that would normally cycle back into the soil from dead matter simply do not. Not at any rate a plant could depend on. Indigenous communities across this coastal plain understood these bays long before any European naturalist set foot near them, understood which plants could survive here and which could not, understood the bogs as their own category of ground, neither fully water nor fully land, governed by rules other soil did not follow. It was into this narrow, punishing, specific geography, and nowhere else on the entire planet, that a small rosette of hinged leaves found a way to grow where almost nothing else could. Here is the design that made it possible. Each leaf ends in a pair of lobes, fringed at the edges, lined on the inner surface with a small number of trigger hairs, usually 3 to each side. A single touch does nothing. The trap requires 2 touches within roughly 20 seconds, or 1 touch followed by a second in short order, before it closes. This is not decoration. It is arithmetic, built directly into living tissue. A mechanism evolved specifically to avoid wasting the plant's limited energy on rainfall, falling debris, or wind-blown grit, false signals that would drain a plant already living on the thinnest possible margin. Once closed, the trap does not simply hold its prey, it seals, forming an increasingly airtight chamber, and begins secreting digestive enzymes remarkably similar to those found in animal stomachs, enzymes that break down the insect over several days, slowly, patiently, extracting nitrogen and phosphorus directly from a captured body rather than waiting on a soil that would never deliver them, where nearly every other flowering plant on Earth pulls its nutrients up through roots. This one built a second system entirely, a shortcut around the ground itself, because the ground had already told it no. This is not aggression, it is accounting. A plant balancing a nutrient deficit, the only way evolution ever found workable in this particular patch of starved coastal soil, and nowhere else, not once, in the entire recorded history of flowering plants. Word of it reached Europe slowly, and skeptically. In the 1760s, colonial official Arthur Dobbs, writing from North Carolina, described to correspondents back in Britain a small plant whose leaves closed around insects like a trap, an account many readers treated as travelers' exaggeration, the kind of tale explorers were known to embellish. A few years later, naturalist John Ellis formally described the species to the scientific community, coining the name that would follow it into every language that adopted it since, a plant behaving, by every outward appearance, like an animal. It took nearly a century for the weight of that claim to be tested properly. Charles Darwin, working through the 1860s and into the 1870s, called it, in private correspondence, one of the most wonderful plants in the world, and then spent years testing it before he would commit that judgment to print. He fed it meat, he fed it cheese, he tested how many touches triggered closure, how long the trap remained sealed, what concentration of nitrogen the plant could extract from a single meal. He was cautious to the point of restraint, unwilling to publish claims about a plant seemingly capable of a kind of digestion, of a kind of decision-making, without evidence thorough enough to survive scrutiny from a scientific community already primed to disbelieve him. When insectivorous plants finally appeared in 1875, it did not overstate. It documented, meticulously, what the bogs of Carolina had already been doing without any audience at all. For a species this specific, this narrowly adapted to one deprived corner of one coastal plain, permanence proved harder to secure than discovery ever was. Fire, not neglect, kept these bogs open for millennia, periodic burns clearing competing vegetation, resetting the ground, preserving exactly the low, sun-exposed, nutrient-poor conditions this plant required. When 20th century land management began suppressing wildfire as a matter of policy, meant to protect nearby settlement and timber, it also quietly began closing the one condition this species had depended on since long before anyone was managing anything. Forests thickened, shade spread, habitat that had remained stable for longer than human memory began to contract, not through any deliberate act against the plant, but as an unintended consequence of managing the land for entirely different priorities. Unmanageable, from the perspective of conventional land policy. Inconvenient, in a system built around timber yield and property lines, not around the fire cycles one small predatory plant required to keep growing at all. Modern soil science has since confirmed, with considerably more instrumentation than Darwin ever had available, what those punishing bogs demonstrated all along, that carnivory here is not an evolutionary flourish but a direct, measurable response to nutrient scarcity, most pronounced in nitrogen-poor, acidic, boggy soils exactly like these, found in only a handful of similarly starved environments worldwide. Genetic studies have traced the species to a single, isolated lineage with no close living relatives sharing its precise trap mechanism, a solution that appears to have emerged once, in one place, under one specific set of deprivations, and was never repeated anywhere else on Earth. Demand, in recent decades, has posed its own quiet threat. Wild populations, already confined to this narrow coastal strip, have been further reduced by illegal poaching for the houseplant trade, collectors removing entire clusters from protected bogs, despite state protections in North Carolina. Criminal penalties now written specifically to address it. Most specimens sold far from these bays, in supermarkets and garden centers worldwide, die within months, mismanaged by owners unaware that a plant this specifically adapted cannot simply be watered like any other. The species survives, in the wild, in fewer places today than it did a century ago, not because its design failed, but because the narrow ground it depends on keeps shrinking around it. Now, in a period of depleted soils, contracting habitats, and systems increasingly unable to sustain what they were never built to accommodate, this plant remains exactly what the bogs made it: patient, specific, entirely self-sufficient within the narrow terms it was given. The knowledge was never lost, it was simply confined to 60 miles of coastal wetland that asked for nothing from the rest of the world, and received, for most of its history, exactly that. Soil does not require abundance to produce something extraordinary, it only requires enough time, and enough deprivation, for something patient to find its own way through. If this record matters to you, preserve it, subscribe, not to grow this channel's numbers, but to keep this file from closing the way so many others already have. See you in another plant documentary video on the Ancient Food Files channel.